Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, the author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. We have a trigger warning on this one, as anyone who is wholly wed to the media coverage of COVID may be discomfited by this particular podcast. So I warn you out there, if you have bought lock, stock, and barrel what you have been told in the media, then you may want to skip this particular podcast. This is a story from the Gateway Pundit. Hollywood's top scientists say there's no evidence face masks work and may actually cause more harm. This is by Eric Blair. Holland's top scientists have examined data and research about COVID-19 and declared there is no clear evidence that wearing face masks protects anyone. In fact, the scientists say wearing masks may actually hamper the fight against the virus. Face masks in public places are not necessary based on all the current evidence, said Cohen Burns, spokesman for the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment. There is no benefit and there may even be a negative impact. Holland's position is based on assessments by the Outbreak Management Team, a group of experts advising the government. It first ruled against masks in May and has reevaluated the evidence several times, including again last week. It believes they detract from a clear three-pronged message that has kept deaths from the coronavirus down to less than half the rate in Britain. Wash hands regularly, maintain social distancing at 1.5 meters, and stay at home if suffering any symptoms. The one exception outside of the medical frontline has been on public transport, where masks are mandatory on the basis that it is difficult to stay apart on crowded buses, ferries, and trains. We have seen this approach works, said Christian Hobing, a professor of infectious diseases in Maastricht and member of the advisory team. Face masks should not be seen as a magic bullet that halts the spread. The evidence for them is contradictory. In general, we think you must be careful with face masks because they can give a false sense of security. People think they're immune from the disease or stop social distancing. That is very negative. Holland's finding comes as Melbourne, Australia is going under a nearly full lockdown for the next 6 weeks, a phase that started Sunday and runs until September 13th. The city's rules: you must stay within 3-mile radius of your home. Only one person from a household is allowed to shop per day. No more than 1 hour of exercise per day, and groups limited to 2. Recreational activity is banned. Curfew from 8 until 5. And masks, of course, are required. People must wear a mask covering whenever leaving the house. There are a few exceptions. People with a medical reason are exempt, as are children younger than 12. Those who have a professional reason are also exempt, and if it's not practical, like when running, but those people will still be expected to carry a face covering at all times to wear when you can, The Guardian reported. Okay. So let's first, as we unpack this story, let's first pick up some of the cultural threads that are associated with this story and with the COVID pandemic response in general. Number one, I want to talk about the cult of expertise. So this is the notion that regardless of how you process the facts you're given, the information you're given, how you assess risk, that you are to put in place of your opinion those of some anointed expert. Who anoints the experts? Well, the government anoints the experts. To a lesser extent, the media anoints the experts, but since the government and the media push the same experts out there, it doesn't much matter where the cart and where the horse is in that regard. What does it take to be an expert? Well, in my profession, an expert is someone whose predictions come true. You can see how that's problematic in this regard, because from the beginning of this pandemic, those people that have been pushed out as experts by the government and the media have been laughably false in their predictions. You could flip a coin and have a better hit rate than these people had, starting from the very beginning when we had the Imperial model released from the UK by Mr. Ferguson, who was spending his time in such a way that he would be on the television on the BBC as a prophet of doom about how this coronavirus was going to kill everybody, and then he would leave the studio and go to the house of his mistress, where he did what he did without regard to spreading the virus. But he claimed, through his bogus model, that we were going to see 2.2 million deaths here in the United States in short order. Laughably off. Laughably off. And yet, he was held out as an expert, at least till he disgraced himself when it became knowledge of how he was spending his free time and had to step down. We have Dr. Fauci. He of the masks are bad, don't use masks when it was politically convenient for the Democrat Party in the United States, so as not to serve as a distraction from their bogus impeachment proceedings. Well, that now all of a sudden masks must be worn. Not only masks, now he wants us to wear goggles, because so many of us pointed out that it was rather ridiculous to think a mask was protective when your eyes, the mucosa in your eye in particular, was exposed and could therefore receive the virus. So he's changed his tune numerous times when he's not completely incoherent, and yet he is an expert. And so whatever he says on any given day, if Dr. Fauci, as he has, says that, hey, having hookups with strangers does not spread the virus, I kid you not, as long as you wear a mask and you do not look at your partner, does not spread the virus, so continue with those hookups. But if you go to church and sing in a choir, that's a no-no. You must not sing in a choir. This is the kind of ridiculous nonsense we get day to day here in the United States from our so-called experts. Expert in this context means nothing except official spokesperson. So we continue to have studies that question core aspects of this narrative and point out the inconsistencies in what we've been told. One of these involves these ginned up cloth masks. The fact of the matter is that the largest virus particles for this coronavirus are 6 times smaller than the typical cloth weave. What does that mean? That means if you cough or sneeze through your cloth mask, you can get a chain of 6 of these particles to pass straight through the weave. Does it mean they stop none of it? No. But in the best studies on the subject, they found that these masks are about 26% effective. Now here's the problem. Every time you cough or sneeze, if you have this Wuhan flu, you will eject into the air around you approximately 2 million virus particles. If you take 74% of 2 million, it's still a very large number of particles that have been ejected into the environment. How many particles does it take in order to trigger an infection in someone? The answer is 1,000. So you have many orders of magnitude, really, of particles out in that environment with people wearing a mask. Now, if you're wearing a mask too, then on the inhale, hey, you get lucky, you got maybe it's 26% effective on the inhale, you're still bringing in a lot of that viral material. And that's if it doesn't hit your eye. So the mask as a barrier defense against transmission of the virus is almost laughable. If you're standing 6 feet apart and the virus has a chance to settle before you step into that space, now you got a chance. Another thing to figure is that even with a mask like an N95, your regular cloth mask has no filtration. So it's really just the weave, the physical weave, that's preventing anything. N95s have filters on them, but the filters only work one way. So if someone is wearing an N95 for their own protection, but they have the virus, what happens when they cough or sneeze? Well, it passes. So it's not 95% effective against the person wearing the N95 mask, ejecting it into the environment. It's only 95% effective against them inhaling the virus. And that only counts if they've had their mask properly fitted to their face. With these cloth masks, they are not properly fitted to your face. So in the bogus tests that they did with the Petri dishes and with material pushed through the mask in front of the mask, what they miss is that because of air pressure, with a mask that's not fitted to your face, you're going to have an amount of that air come out the sides, come out the top, come out the bottom of the mask. That's just reality. So you're still ejecting virus into the air around you. So the stated reasons for wearing this mask, and these get muddy from time to time, is it to protect you or is it to protect others? Because it can't do both. Well, the stated reasons are invalid. As the Dutch have noted, the better plan is to keep your message around washing your hands, keeping your distance, and not going forth if you have symptoms. A very simple message. I would add another one that people seem to be missing, but is important, and that is when you cough or sneeze into your elbow. Lift up your arm, plant your nose in the crook of your elbow, and cough and sneeze that way. Why? Because now your arm and whatever's covering your arm is going to contain the force of that sneeze or cough. And it'll be a much more effective barrier to the virus getting out into the atmosphere around you than a little piece of cloth. The other thing to figure is that people wearing these masks, because they've been told these masks are effective, even though on the box that these masks come in, it explicitly says, will not protect against coronavirus. They've been told that, so they believe that if they're wearing the mask, they're containing the virus. But if they cough or sneeze, what do? Well, now they're not covering themselves. They just cough and sneeze through the mask. And as we've stated, that means they're ejecting large amounts of the virus into their environment. Now, fret not, because again, that only comes into play if they have the virus. If they have active symptoms of the virus, they're actually shedding the disease in a manner that would be picked up when they do one of those nasal swab RNA tests. If they don't have the virus, they're just coughing and sneezing, and you'll get whatever else they have. But the point is that by wearing the mask, we're trading something that's not effective for something that would be, such as coughing or sneezing into your elbow, as a preventive measure, keeping the virus from spreading widely. So I think the Dutch are absolutely right there. It comes down to your values. So if you value not believing common sense, but only listening to who the government tells you to listen to, then you will go with the, quote, experts, the anointed ones, no matter how incoherent they are. And when they say something new, you'll simply ignore what they said previously, no matter how much you believe that. When you see Dr. Fauci sitting in an empty baseball stadium right next to two companions with his mask down, chatting away amiably, you won't think this man's a hypocrite. He doesn't believe a word that he's saying. You won't think. Why are there two sets of rules? One for the powerful expert and one for the rest of us. You won't think, as I did with Ferguson, how dare he preach and scare people in public with this nonsense and then go about his life just as he did the day before, while helping to keep the rest of us from being able to go about ours. You'll never think those things because what you value is doing as you're told. And that brings us to the second point. The purpose of the mask is not to prevent the transmission of the virus. It has very little to do with that. The purpose of the mask is the same thing as the burqa in the Middle East. It is to show obedience. It is a public display, an unmistakable symbol that you do what you're told. And as things are added, so as Fauci responds by saying, you need to wear goggles. Well, you're going to see a bunch of people out there wearing the racquetball goggles along with their face diapers. And more importantly, chastising anyone who does not. There was a case recently where there's actually video of this, where a woman walking with her boyfriend was so offended by a couple of men sitting on a bench who didn't have a mask on that she took her hot coffee and threw it in one of their faces. He jumped up and promptly administered a beatdown of epic proportions to her boyfriend. There being a cultural shibboleth about hitting a woman, even after she's thrown hot coffee in your face. So she is hitting him, slapping him, yelling profanities at him, and he is beating the crap out of her boyfriend, which has a certain comedic effect to it. Even funnier, after this incident happened, her boyfriend, bleeding down his shirt, called the police to lodge a complaint against them. The police, we were told, when they showed up and heard that she threw coffee in the man's face to trigger the incident, laughed at the people who thought that you could do that, get a beatdown in response, and have the person who gave you the beatdown get taken away by the police. This is how our culture in America has devolved. It's not enough that you believe the expert. It's not enough that you adopt whatever gree they tell you to, whatever monkey paw they tell you to rub, and religiously do so. But you must mandate that everybody does. And we are to that point in many a state. In my own state of Colorado, there is a rule. It's not a law because we no longer have a legislature, because the governor is ruling by fiat. In this, the land of the free and the home and the brave. But we have a rule that says you must wear masks outdoors and in any place of business. In my particular county, the sheriff of the county has announced he will not be enforcing that rule, having neither the resources nor the inclination to do it. So we here are free. I went to the hardware store just the other day, and whereas a couple weeks ago when this first came out, they were all wearing masks and looking uncomfortable when I walked in without mine, they are now about 60% maskless. So freedom is is beginning to break out, at least in some quarters. But when I go into Denver proper, it's a different story. And you see all those face diapers, one by one by one, all those lovely burqas. And if they are told that they must face Washington, D.C. 5 times a day and pray for an end to the virus, a secular prayer, of course, which does not mention God, they will do so. It's as simple as that. Because culturally, they have adopted the value of obedience to one's betters, to one's masters. This has been sold to them in part as an outgrowth of political correctness, which was the weaponization of politeness. And you start seeing memes out there saying that even if the masks don't work, why not wear one to be kind? To be kind to whom, you may ask? But if you ask those kind of questions, you're persona non grata. You are canceled in our culture. So when you see our leaders joining rioters with not a face mask in sight, you just swallow it and put yours on religiously, as the people of Melbourne are having to do, and act as though the clean air outside is contaminated. Now, I went through the nuclear, biological, chemical courses in the military. I was stationed overseas. We would have regular drills where we would have to suit up in what the military refers to as MOP 4. What is MOP 4? MOP 4 is when you put on over your clothing, over your uniform, another rubber outfit, head to toe, completely contained, so as to protect you from exposure to radiation, to, although I suppose radiation it doesn't really offer much, to biological contaminants such as this virus, or to chemical agents such as nerve gas. It's topped off with a gas mask which has a charcoal filter. So what you exhale is filtered, what you inhale is filtered. It covers most of your head. You have a hood that covers the back of your head. And your eyes are covered, your nose is covered, your mouth is covered, you're breathing through a gas mask. It is fitted to your face. There's a seal around the gas mask. Needless to say, you get very hot, very sweaty, particularly in the desert climes where these were used widely, wearing all this gear. But it offers protection from a contaminated environment. And in fact, when you leave a contaminated environment to go into, say, your tent, you first go through a decontamination procedure where they wash down your external suit and gear. You take that off piece by piece, being careful not to touch any of the external gear without the gear itself. So in other words, you're keeping everything external to your body that you were just exposed to in the environment outside. And then you scrub yourself down on the inside in case there was a leak, in case anything happened. You go through a fairly lengthy hygiene regime in order to come back into a decontaminated environment without introducing contaminants to it. Why does the military do all this stuff if a cloth wrapped around your face does the same thing? Is the military just stupid? No, the military actually wants to stop the spread of whatever it is that's out there in the contaminated environment. They want to save the lives of the troop. They want to keep them from coming down with whatever bad stuff is out there. And so we go to all that trouble to do it because that is how you do it. When the aim is to actually protect yourself. You've seen it when you've seen the outbreak suits that are used, for example, in the case of an Ebola outbreak. Ebola is spread by fluids. It's nasty, it's lethal. And so in an Ebola outbreak, people suit up in gear that's recognizably similar to what the military does. So why aren't you seeing that for corona? And the answer is because everybody knows, who has been anointed an expert anyway, that this virus is nowhere near that lethal, nowhere near that easily transmitted, and they don't want the hassle of suiting up and taking the suit off. So instead, they give you the psychological suit that's no better, really, than those Italian mothers making the hand signs to ward off the evil eye and the devil. In terms of the protection that it affords, but is really good at identifying who is buying this nonsense and who is not. So we have the experts, we have the culture of obedience. I want to talk about something else with regard to these masks and these studies. And that's this. When you see all these people around you wearing masks, it does two things. Number one, it is a visual indication that despite the fact that it is a beautiful, sunny day out there, the wind's blowing, it's lovely out, that when you see all those masks, it tells people it's bad to be outside. Because if you could be outside without a mask, right? You would be outside without a mask. It keeps people cooped up. It keeps them oppressed. It justifies things like all these businesses being closed. It justifies not being able to see your doctor for routine health care, not being able to go to the dentist. It is a visual artifact of the pandemic. Much like if you were in Britain during the Blitz and you saw all the people wearing gas masks, it would signify the danger outside. So it has that effect. And much like those same gas masks, when you see people in gas masks, in the military, everyone has their name tag on the outside of their gear, or it's written in marker on the outside of your gear. Why? Because you don't know who the hell anybody is when they're wearing all that gear. You can't tell. Everyone looks the same. And it's the same thing when you have everyone all masked up. You can't see their face. And so if you can't see their face, deep within our primitive snake brain, it tells us this is a dangerous person. That's why when you see criminals wearing masks, people have the reaction that they do towards them. That's why in February of this year, if a bunch of people had come into a convenience store wearing masks, you would immediately be on alert thinking that the place was going to be knocked over, robbed. It dehumanizes people. We are being trained culturally to treat our neighbors not as our neighbors, not as our fellow humans, not as potential friends, but as risk, as danger, as enemy. That is what we are being trained to do. It is the atomization of our culture. Stay in your home. Stick only to your immediate family. Rely on social media for all of your information. And that social media, as we've seen in past episodes, has been very strongly filtered of late. You know, we're out here in cattle country, and one of the things that's amazing about how the cattle industry works is when you look at how cows are led to slaughter. And the way they do that is not just by taking a herd and going around with a gun and shooting everybody in the herd and, you know, as they run, shoot them down or something like that. But it's very simple. They push them through a maze, one by one, led by one of the cows that they trust, so that they're used to following it. And they go one by one until they come to the end of the line. And then very quickly, they are shot. Their throats are cut. The blood runs out and they die. One by one. A similar process, of course, comprised the Nazi machine in the death camps, where what people don't realize is that the vast majority of people who died in those camps were not there long. They were packed into boxcars and endured long days without any services or accommodations or food or water. And when they got off those boxcars, relieved to be out of that cramped, stinky hellhole that they'd been in, they get out of the boxcar. They're segregated into lines. And one of those lines goes to a place where they're told that that there is a typhus outbreak in the camp, or that there's a lice infestation, and that they first have to take a shower. So all their belongings are taken away from them, and then they are led one by one into the shower until they're packed in at last. And what comes out of the shower heads is not water at all. As with cattle, so with people. That is what the Nazis taught us. And that is the inevitable destination once you start blindly obeying and following whichever expert they put at the head of the line, ignoring what your own mind tells you, what your own senses reveal to you, and placing blind faith in the goodness of those leading you on. My friends, in our culture, Western culture, American culture, should it not be the tyrant, the dictator, the criminal who hide their faces, and not free men? Thank you.